have a question, Anthony. When you look at the debt issue, how do you see? Forget the politics of it. Is there any viable path to solving the debt problem?
Yeah, this is definitely a viable path, and you guys are close to Elon. I'm not, and if I tweeted this, it's coming from me, so it would be perceived as negative from the Trump administration. But let me give you some things to think about. In the Alan Greenspan book, The Age of Turbulence, which was written in 2007, okay, there was a exposition of what the pay-as-you-go legislation was. And so let me discuss that with you. Do you know what that is, pay-as-you-go legislation?
I do not. Tell me.
If you don't know, I'll give a brief explanation. So Richard Dorman, Office of Management and Budget, he's working for George Herbert Walker Bush. He goes to Bush and says, "Listen, we had tremendous deficit spending under Reagan. We're going to have a peace dividend. The walls come down. We're going to have this peace dividend, but we've got to create some guardrails on the Congress. And so I'm going to propose legislation. We got to get Democrats and Republicans to vote on it. Here's the legislation: pay as you go. If you want a tax cut, that's fine, but then you have to find something in the government to cut. If you want a increase in social services, that's fine, but then you have to raise taxes somewhere." And so Richard Gephardt worked on this with them. Some Democrats actually lost their seats. They passed this legislation, and then we went to war, accidentally, the Gulf War. We had a recession in the United States, and they wanted to increase social services. And so all of us remember Bush raised taxes pursuant to pay-as-you-go. Read my lips, no new taxes, but he violated that, right? And he raised taxes. Okay, when Clinton won the presidency, Bush said to him, "Listen, we put this pay-as-you-go legislation in. If you adhere to it, you'll run a budget surplus by the end of the decade." And Clinton said, "Okay." Robert Wright, my old law school professor, wanted to run deficits. He was the Secretary of Labor. Robert Rubin, my old boss from Goldman, he said, "No, go for the tax increase, stick to pay-as-you-go. You'll send a big message to the bond markets, and we'll get to a surplus in this country." So Clinton listened to Rubin. At the end of his term, we printed a $240 billion surplus. And just to remind everybody, the CBO, Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, estimated that there would be a $5 trillion budget surplus by the end of calendar year 2010. Okay, that did not happen. And the campaign, Bush versus Gore, Gore said, "I want to push that money into the environment." Bush said, "I want to give it back to the taxpayers." Bush won the race. He cut taxes in March. But then, guys, we went to war in October of 2001. It's the first time in U.S. history that we went to war without a tax increase. In fact, we had a tax cut before the war, and it started this deficit trajectory that we're on now. So if you want to curb that, you have to restore pay-go. You got to get somebody like Elon Musk behind it. Yes, he can shave a point here or a point there off of the growth of these governmental agencies. But if you actually put the guardrails in, over time, what will happen is you'll get to a surplus again. Now, could it take 15 years, Salim? Yes, it could, but you would stop the exponential bleeding that we're in right now. So I submit to you guys, you can't cut $2 trillion from the budget. It would be too austere. It would cause an economic collapse. But you could put the country on a controlled diet.
What is the total budget today that you're cutting $2 trillion in?
6.7 trillion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So listen,
we're taking in about $5 trillion in tax revenues, and we're running about a $1.7 trillion deficit.
Do you guys agree that there is most likely $2 trillion of fat and unrequired expense in the government budget?
I do not agree with that. I don't think you have.
You don't think we can have official?
I agree. You'd have to really cut entitlements or cut military.
Could you cut 6-7% from the budget? Yes. Could you find $300 to $500 billion of stuff to cut from the budget? Yes, I do believe that. Could you cut $2 trillion from the budget without causing a colossal contraction in the economy? No.
Okay, so here's the other side of the equation. Salim, given where we are in the steepness of this curve, we're going to talk about AI, humanoid robotics, Bitcoin, a whole slew of other technologies. We have the ability to accelerate the U.S. economy significantly. I mean, for me, I think that we're about to enter a period of the Roaring '20s. That if we can really hit on deregulation across a number of industries, if we can increase our energy budget across the United States, if we can give people who get their PhDs at our top universities a green card so they stay here, we increase the intellectual capacity of this nation, that we can have a renaissance that really drives the nation's revenues up and to the right, in addition to cuts. I mean, I think this is the most exciting time ever to be an entrepreneur and a technologist. I'm curious, do you agree with that thesis?
Yes, but I think there's so many structural issues happening, like potential war, that have to be dealt with. I think that payment of the debt is a massive structural problem. What Anthony's proposed I'm familiar now with the pay-as-you-go aspect of it. And I remember Clinton balancing the budget by the end of his decade. I think that's one of the most exciting things. Is that the Doge
in the background?
That's my Doge in the background. I'll mute while they're barking away. Sorry.
That's okay. Doge is coming after you. All
right. So I think there has to be a structured path, a glide path to balancing the budget, because otherwise, if we keep running up debt. And this is the problem that neither party dealt with in the election, is the unbelievable debt cycle, because that's an exponential curve in the wrong way. It doesn't matter much else what we do, is you'll hobble the government and the country so much by doing that, and the whole thing will implode. And that's I think the danger that Anthony's pointing out.
Yeah, well, it's never worked, though. I mean, so the idea has never worked. That 14 years of austerity in Great Britain has left the country weaker, and combined with Brexit, Ronald Reagan understood that. FDR understood that. Austerity does not work, and that type of radicalism at the governmental level. Remember, everybody says the government should be run by like a business. I can prove to you empirically, I can prove to you through history that the government should not be run like a business. And it's not a business. The government has to be run with a public service orientation towards policy. And whether people like this or not, the bottom rungs of the people in a society have to be protected by a government. And I would submit to you that Henry Ford got this right. Henry Ford was a great social engineer. He told people, you are going to make enough money to afford the car that you're producing. Moreover, I'm going to make sure you're in a small house with a great school system, because I don't want you descending on my Dearborn, Michigan mansion with a tiki torch and a pitchfork. I just don't want that. Okay. And so he understood that good social engineering from the government is aspirational. My dad is a crane operator out here on Long Island with a good union wage, could afford a $16,000 house in 1962. And we could live. It was a small little hallway kitchen, one regular bath, but 5 of us lived there very comfortably, went to a good public school system, and we rose in America. We had an aspirational blue-collar family. Governments have to protect that. Trump got the SALT deduction wrong, and to his credit, it wasn't his fault. It was policy that was put on him by the Koch family and by Paul Ryan. But what he got wrong, he now understands. Okay. In December of 2017, when I was still talking with Trump, he said, well, what do you think of the SALT tax deduction? And again, that's a limitation of $10,000 of state income taxes off your federal return. And what I said to the president at that time, it's going to hurt the economy. It's going to hurt the engines in the economy. He said, well, why is that? I said, well, these coastal cities, Santa Monica, New York, Philadelphia, these coastal cities need safety nets. They're blue for a reason. Poor people are teeming into the place. Did Sergey Brin, was he super wealthy when he arrived in the United States? Was Elon Musk a multi-gajillionaire when he arrived in the United States? No. And so what you need from your government is you need a platform of equal opportunity. We don't want equal outcomes. The 3 of us, I think, agree on that. We're libertarians. I want there to be Jeff Bezos's, Peter Diamandis's, Elon Musk's. But what we have to make sure, though, the government's got to supply a smart kid growing up in a poor neighborhood or growing up with a dysfunctional family at least has a shot at aspirational opportunity in America. So for all of those reasons, you can't run the government like a business, and you can't take a hacksaw to the government. If you do that, you'll paralyze the system, and it'll be very bad for the culture.